The back of the room is Professor Andaya. You guys might know her from CPD 116, Substance Abuse Fundamentals. And we have our special guest here. I should have asked you how to spell your name, or say your name, but Daniel Gumbiner? Gumbiner, I'm close. So Daniel is our special guest today. He was born and raised in Northern California. He's graduated from UC Berkeley in 2011, and he lives in Las Vegas now, where he's the managing editor of The Believer magazine. The Boat Builder is his first novel and was nominated for a National Book Award. Daniel, would you like to come up and start your presentation?
Hey, thanks everyone for having me. It's really good to be here on all of these different screens and in this room itself. I'm gonna read a little bit from my book, and I figured we could just open up the floor to if you guys have any questions or want to discuss anything about it. Is everyone able to hear me okay through the mic? Okay. So this is my first book. It's it takes place in a small town in Northern California, and it follows a young man named Berg who has suffered a concussion, and as a result of that concussion has chronic head pain, which ultimately leads him to become addicted to prescription pain medicine. And so the book begins sort of after all of that has happened, when he's moving out to this small town where most of the book takes place, and he moves out there because he's going to he gets the opportunity to house sit for this woman named Mimi, who is his friend's mom, who is traveling in Bali, he kind of thinks he should go out there to try and create some space between the realm of his addiction and himself, get a fresh start. And so this first section that I'm going to read takes place right at the beginning, when he's just gotten to Mimi's house, and he is hanging out at this bar and kind of adjusting to his new life in the country, because he's a city person and isn't used to it. And Mimi has, the other thing you need to know about this passage is that Mimi has 4 chickens that he's in charge of taking care of, and she also has a dog. So that's just some context for you guys. Berg spent most nights at the tavern. He would sit at the bar, stoned on perk 30s, drinking beer and watching baseball games he didn't care about. He often ended up in conversations with the owner of the bar, a man named Ed Konatich, whose family also owned the other bar in town, the Western, which was located on the bay, next door to Vlasic's Boatworks. Ed Konatich hated Nick Vlasic and often told long, convoluted stories which concluded with Ed or one of Ed's family members suffering some grave miscarriage of justice at the hands of Nick Vlasic or one of Nick Vlasic's family members. Ed also liked to tell stories about his stepbrother, Gary Konatich, who, were it not for a freak staph infection caused by a dirty knee brace, might have made it in the NBA. He could shoot the lights out, Ed said, played on that team with Walt Weir that went to state semifinals, could shoot the lights out. Ed was not really interested in listening to what Berg had to say, or what anyone had to say for that matter. He was one of these old men who seemed to have chosen his profession so that he would have a convenient and unassailable soapbox from which he could express his opinions. This suited Berg fine. He wasn't very interested in discussing his life. Also at the bar was Tom, an older rancher with coarse, unfinished features. Tom was slowly settling into dementia, and he was no longer able to add sums well. Every time he settled up his tab, he'd count and recount his money, licking his finger before removing each dollar bill and placing it on the table. "Oh, hang on, let me start again," he'd say, shaking his head. Sometimes Ed Konatich came over and counted the money for him. "You got 7 here, Tom. 3 beers, so you owe 9. "Oh, I knew I was missing a few. There was John Coleman, too, the fisherman, and a younger guy he hung around with named Dennis Lapley. And there was Claire, an engineer for the water district, and her boyfriend, Lenny, and Joe Leggett, who delivered gas tanks and had fought in the Korean War and seemed to have a lot of hobbies. On Friday nights, there was a guy named Woody who played a 30-minute set of his own country songs, which were mostly about deer. This song's about a deer I saw that went and disappeared behind a hillside, he would say. Or, this is a song about 2 small deer and 1 medium deer that I saw on the road by the dance palace." The only person Berg had talked to about pills was Lapley. Berg could tell he was an addict the moment he met him. The small bruises on his arms, the runny nose, the constant sniffing. Lapley was from Oregon, but he'd worked in construction in Tolinas for a few years now. That's the name of the town, Tolinas. Berg suspected that he was in his 30s, but he wasn't sure. His eyes were small and dull, and it seemed like the skin on his face had been stretched tight and then stapled across his jawline. Unlike Berg, Lapley shot up, and he once asked Berg if he wanted to join him in the bathroom. Nah, man, I stay away from needles. It's the same thing, Lapley said. You're kidding yourself. It's the exact same thing. Lapley said he was a volunteer with the sheriff's department and claimed he could arrest people. Berg didn't believe it. A dopehead volunteering with the sheriff's department? Lapley seemed to lie about almost everything. But when he spoke about the 2 times he'd been through withdrawal, Berg had the sense that he was telling the truth. Lapley's descriptions reminded Berg of his own experience. Sweats, muscle spasms, watery eyes, stomach cramps, violent shaking. I did it all on my own, Lapley boasted. And I know if I'd wanted to, I could do it again. Don't need no damn rehab center holding my hand. Berg had gone to rehab. For the first 2 weeks, they put him on clonidine, baclofen, meloxicam, and gabapentin, 50 milligrams of Seroquel or 100 milligrams of trazodone to help him sleep. And then, after the first month, clonidine as needed, Visceral for anxiety, B12 vitamins, the slow tapering of his gabapentin dose, peaking at 1,600 milligrams. Antidepressants too, mostly Wellbutrin, 150 milligrams, but also 30 milligrams of Prozac. It was important to identify your triggers, they had told Berg, to know them and track them. Eliminate your supply. Remove the numbers from your phone. And he had done this. Deleted Eugene's number from his phone, all the people he'd ever taken pills with. When the opportunity to house sit for Mimi materialized, it seemed like a good first step toward reestablishing a sober life. If he moved up to Tolinas, he could stay with Nell while also putting some tangible distance between himself and the world of his addiction. But shortly after he moved up there, he'd relapsed. He was over at Gloria and Jerry's for a neighborly dinner, and during a trip to the bathroom, he couldn't resist opening the medicine cabinet. Gloria and Jerry were old people, and old people in America always had opioids, like 15 different kinds of opioids. It was as if they'd been collecting them since the 60s, planning to bring them to Antiques Roadshow and get them appraised. The next couple of weeks were immensely pleasurable. Berg's stretch of abstinence had lowered his tolerance, and he was able to get high in a way that had eluded him in the months prior to rehab. He stopped calling his sponsor, stopped going to the NA meetings in Pine Gulch. When his supply ran out, he began to casually enter homes that appeared unoccupied. He usually picked homes that were along the hiking trail, and he always carried a walking stick with him. If someone caught him, he would say he was lost and been looking for some place to use a phone. Every addict has a story about the impermanence of their addiction. For Berg, at this time, the return of Nell would constitute the end of his use. That's his partner. She was still on tour, had been on tour for the last 2 months. He was only doing this until she returned, having one last affair with opioids before he buckled down and endured sobriety for the rest of his life. This was why he had gotten sober in the first place, why he'd gone to rehab and quit his job and moved up here. He was sick of the city. It was all garbage and noise and men with gelled hair. He intended to go clean in more than one sense. He wanted to find work that was simple and fulfilling, to live a life of health and exercise and fresh air. But at the moment, these ambitions seemed distant. One morning, after a night of drinking at the tavern, he woke up with a headache. The headaches had a creepy, slinky quality at first, as if he were prey and they were stalking him. The pain was not there, but he knew it was on its way, knew that a slight movement or sound could catalyze it. He took a couple of Vicodin and started a pot of coffee. While he was waiting for the coffee, he headed down to the coop to feed the chickens. It took him a few moments to process the scene of carnage he encountered. One of the chickens, Baton Rouge, was missing, and there were feathers and blood all over the plywood floor. Sacramento and Atlanta were pecking at Lansing, who appeared gravely wounded. They're all named after state capitals, chickens. Berg yelled at 2 of them and shooed them away, and then picked up Lansing, who had a bad wound near her neck. She shuddered in his arms, and he whispered calming things in her ear. When she seemed still enough, he began walking toward the house. He couldn't leave her outside, but he couldn't let her run around loose inside Mimi's house either. In the end, he decided to place her inside Fish's crate. He pulled out Fish's bed, which was covered in black dog hair, and laid down newspaper for Lansing. Fish trotted over, clearly disturbed. He kept looking at the crate and then looking back at Berg, waiting for someone to explain this obvious injustice. Back in the kitchen, Berg consulted the note Mimi had left him and found the number he was looking for. If there are any problems with the animals, she had written, call Ben at 415-327-6688. Berg called Ben and began explaining in great detail what he had found in the chicken pen. Blood everywhere, he said, and then he repeated it, everywhere. As he relived the scene, the drama of the moment really took hold of him. He was a little stoned now, the headache receding but still there. I'll be right over, Ben said. Ben was in his late 30s with thinning hair and some kind of red streak in his right eye. He wore a white shirt with holes in it and a camouflage baseball hat. He had tattoos on his knuckles. Ben surveyed the coop for a minute and discovered a gap between two of the boards. He kneeled down, examined the crevice, and then issued his verdict. Looks like a coyote got him. A coyote, Berg said. Yep, must have snuck right through here, picked his favorite chicken, and scurried off for a nice dinner. Ben told Berg that he should build a wire fence around the coop. He said the fence should go down 18 inches underground to prevent the coyotes from burrowing beneath it. And what do I do with the wounded chicken? The wounded one? Where is she? I put her in the dog crate. Ben looked like he was about to say something, but thought better of it. How bad is she injured, he asked. Pretty badly, Berg said. There's a big gash near her neck. From the coyote? Seems like it, and the other chickens. Well, I would just put her out of her misery then, Ben said. Kill her? Yeah, she's just going to suffer otherwise. Berg thanked Ben for his help and walked back up to the house with a sick feeling in his stomach. This is what you have to do, he said to himself. You're helping the chicken. This is life in the country. This is nature. Coyotes attack chicken coops, and chickens get weird neck wounds, and then you have to kill them. He walked into the kitchen and picked out the largest blade. It suddenly seemed like a very small blade, and he wondered whether Mimi had something larger he could use. He looked through the shed, but the only potential substitute he found was a pair of garden shears, and this seemed cruel, medieval somehow. Back in the kitchen, he opened the liquor cabinet and grabbed a bottle of whiskey. He took a long pull, winced, and then picked up the knife. When he turned around, he noticed that Fish was several feet away, staring at him. What will this guy do next, he seemed to be saying. He's out of his mind. Berg gripped the knife tightly and walked over to the dog crate. He knelt by the crate and began cooing to the chicken as if she were a cat. Berg had only ever owned cats, and all the noises he made toward animals were cat noises. Come on out, Lansing, he said. Come on, sweet girl. But the chicken did not want to come out. She had been attacked by a coyote and then attacked by her fellow chickens, whom, Berg imagined, she probably considered her friends. And now she was finally safe in this strange plastic box, and there was no way she was going to come out. She scurried to the back of the crate where Berg could not reach her. It was a big crate. Fish was a big dog. Come on now, Berg said, reaching for her with one hand and holding the knife with the other. Come on out here. He thought about trying to kill the chicken while it was still inside the crate, but this seemed difficult, physics-wise, and then there would be blood all over the crate and Fish would never forgive him. He set the knife down on the kitchen table and paced around the room, thinking about what he should do. He could call Ben again and ask him for help. He could try tipping the crate upside down. Or he could let the chicken live. This option began to take hold of him. He had never wanted to kill the chicken in the first place, he thought. That was Ben's idea. Why not let her live inside the crate? He walked out to the coop and filled a bowl with chicken feed. The other two chickens were sitting silently on their straw as though nothing important had happened that morning. You've shown your true colors, Berg said aloud to the chickens. Pegging an injured friend, kicking her when she was down. You guys are sick. Back at the house, he placed the bowl of chicken feed in the dog crate, along with a teacup of water. Then he read online about how to care for a wounded chicken. They recommended putting the chicken in a dark place with some kind of heating lamp, so he brought over an electric heater and he draped a blanket on top of the crate. Fish stood by the whole time, the permanence of the situation beginning to dawn on him. When the crate was fixed up, Berg made himself a bowl of cereal, sat down at the kitchen table and emailed Mimi to tell her what had happened. After he wrote the email, he began to look through his inbox. A newsletter from the hippie temple in the city he'd gone to once or twice for the high holidays, a link to a basketball highlight from his brother, and finally, an email from Nell. Her band was back in California now, and she'd be home in a week. He walked back over to the crate and looked at Lansing. Blood all over her feathers, but no blood dripping. Outside, a light rain was falling. Morning calls of birds and the bark of a dog, and in the distance, the grind and rip of a circular saw. He picked up the teacup of water and held it to the chicken. Drink, he said. You need to drink. So that's from the beginning of the book when Berg is still struggling with his addiction, obviously, and trying to adjust to his new life. It's not going very well for him. This second passage I'm going to read takes place later in the book, in the middle of the book, when Berg has just started to work with this boat builder, whose name is Alejandro. A big part of the story is about Berg apprenticing with this boat builder and learning this craft and the manner by which that training and process helps him to see his addiction in a different light and approach challenges in a different light in his own life too. And so this passage that I'm about to read is from the first chapter of the book, when he's first meeting Alejandro and sort of learning what his world is like. It's a very unusual world. He's a recluse who sort of lives on the edge of this town, who Berg ends up meeting through a series of different connections. Berg guessed that Alejandro was around 65 years old. Every morning he woke at sunrise and took a walk through the woods. When he returned from his walk, he had toast, eggs, and cowboy coffee, and read the paper all the way through. Ufa is Alejandro's other apprentice, and Rebecca is his wife. Ufa, Rebecca, and his children rose around this time and joined him in the kitchen for breakfast. There was a jovial atmosphere to the farmhouse in the mornings, with Rebecca and all of the children discussing the farm-related work that needed to be done that day. On any given morning, the generator needed to be fixed, the irrigation in the tomato patch repaired, the animals fed, the goats' toenails clipped, the bread made, the cheese made, the sausage made, the cows milked, the fence by the chicken run mended, the pear trees pruned and inspected for blight, the soil temperature recorded, and someone need to go into town to buy a 5-gallon bucket. Alejandro said he was part Chilean, part Hawaiian, and part something else. He'd grown up in Tahiti in California, and his father had made his living chartering tourists back and forth from the west coast to Tahiti on a schooner named Hoku Lua. There was a large black and white photo of this boat in the shop. It hung above the workbench, next to a photo of Ufa and Alejandro from many years ago. In the photo, the two men were standing in front of the rib cage of some small boat, both of them in overalls. Ufa looked very young in the photo. He couldn't have been more than 18 years old. The boat shop was a large, airy place. It was not entirely disordered, but you could not say that it was orderly either. There were miscellaneous cans of turpentine and linseed oil, stacks of black locust and pepperwood and cedar, old paper coffee cups full of fasteners and bolts, and hundreds of tools, some of them in better shape than others. Several dogs came in and out of the shop, and Berg's favorite dog was named Swallow. She was a black gray mutt with long eyelashes and a runny snout. During the first week of his apprenticeship, she ate a dead squirrel, and it made her horribly sick. Berg found her behind the shop vomiting, but she seemed to be in good spirits. In between each heave, she would look up at Berg, entirely unrepentant. "I'd do it again," she seemed to be saying. "I loved eating the squirrel, and I'd do it all again." Berg learned that many people in Tolinas believed Alejandro to be mentally ill. One day he ran into Joe Leggett in town, for example, and told him that he was apprenticing with Alejandro. He hadn't seen Leggett since he stopped going to the tavern. "Good luck with that," Leggett said. "That guy's a quack." It was true that Alejandro was strange. His mind was borderless and kinetic. He'd sit down and talk to his 6-year-old granddaughter for 2 hours and become entirely absorbed in the child's world. His yard was littered with broken down cars and other detritus. Shortly after Berg met him, he became interested in pasteurizers and designed and built his own portable pasteurizer for Rebecca to use in the field. After that, he began carving Elizabethan lutes. He would stay in the shop after hours, working on these lutes that he didn't know how to play. But Berg never doubted Alejandro's sanity, because the first thing he'd seen was his work. His first experiences with Alejandro revolved around building, and everything Alejandro did matched. Everything fit. He was a master with hand tools, and his intellectual horsepower was astonishing. He would stay up late into the night, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and drinking coffee and looking at lines. Lines are the architectural plans of a boat that show the builder of the boat in 3 different perspectives. Berg would try to keep up with him for a few hours, but then he'd fatigue. The lines of American fishing boats are high art, Alejandro said. Americans are strange. We do certain things that are unfathomable, like sit in traffic. To me, this is evidence of mass psychosis, all of these people sitting in traffic. But the lines of American boats are both beautiful and practical. As much as Berg liked spending time with Alejandro, he felt inferior in his company. Alejandro was so confident and intelligent, his daily existence so full of life, that Berg felt intimidated. Alejandro never stopped investigating and questioning, and Berg, unfamiliar with even the basics of some of the issues Alejandro was exploring, struggled to keep up. About 30% of the time, he didn't understand what Alejandro was talking about, but he just kept hanging on, kept listening, like a foreigner trying to learn a new language. Much of Alejandro's work relied on sensory intelligence. He was able, for example, to determine the exact moisture content of a piece of wood by smelling it. This was important because wood changed shape as it dried. If you did not accurately determine moisture content, you might end up with a boat that, after a couple of years, had large gaps between its planks. Various species of wood had widely different structural properties and dried at different rates. You see, Alejandro would say, holding a cut of white oak to Berg's nose, you must know the smells for each wood. The way the wood was cut mattered, too. Most lumber was flat sawn, but Alejandro would quarter saw his lumber because it gave him more pieces of wood with vertical grain. This type of wood was less likely to shrink or develop checks. When a tree dries, Alejandro explained, it is opening from the pith. Its rings are trying to flatten out. So a piece of wood with highly curved rings, a piece with horizontal grain, is going to move more than a piece of wood with flat rings or vertical grain. You must anticipate this. You must always be thinking about how the wood will change with time. Alejandro's professorial style was highly improvisational. After discussing the differences between vertical and horizontal grains, he might point to the floorboards of the shop, show Berg how they were horizontal grain, how they had checked. From there, he might explain how there was adobe under the floor of the shop, which would lead to a discussion of California's geology, which would segue into a commentary on the exceptionally hot lava of Kilauea, and move from there to a story about hula, the slow form of hula that his mother had practiced in Tahiti, which was distinct from the more common touristic version of the dance. All of this concluding, somehow, with a contemplation of the cello as an instrument, its merits and deficiencies. It was dizzying, but it was always interesting. And I'll stop there. So if you guys have any questions about the book or, you know,
Did he ever get clean?
What?
Did he ever get clean?
He at certain points during the book, he is clean. Yes. Yeah. It's an ongoing flux for him throughout the course of the book. Yeah.
If there's anybody has a question over Zoom, I'm monitoring the chat, so I can ask the question again.
It looks like someone in that classroom has a question.
Okay, yeah.
Is it called the Boat Builder? Is that the
Title?
Yes, that's the title. Yeah.
You can get it on Amazon for $11.95. I downloaded this morning. I read the first 3 chapters. It was great. Oops. Sorry. Make sure. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
The man at the end that's teaching him about the wood kind of reminds me of Ted Kaczynski.
Because he was
Interesting.
also lives in the world, and he said that humans are like cogs in machines. You know,
Yeah.
Did have a read that. I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, there are similarities between the two of them. I think that's a pretty common strain of sort of a certain type of Northern Californian thinking. This book started, I took a boat building class with a guy named Bob Darr, who used to own a boat building shop in a small town called Marshall in Northern California. And that's also nearby where I grew up. And as I got to know Bob, he told a lot of stories about his time in Marshall. And that was sort of when I first started thinking about the book, was talking with Bob. And part of the reason I wanted to write it was because listening to Bob speak reminded me of, just sort of resonated with my own memory of growing up in that area, which is, there's a sort of peculiar mix of rural culture intertwined with new agey post-60s hippie culture that is very kind of particular to that region. And I think Ted Kaczynski definitely is, that's the same zeitgeist, those guys. And so Alejandro is definitely a part of that. And there are other characters in the book who sort of have those kinds of voices to them. Yeah. Yeah.
What was your inspiration for
Yeah, so the big inspiration really was what I was just mentioning, sort of taking this class, speaking with Bob, and I really sort of started the book from a place of thinking about the setting. I wanted to capture the texture and feeling of that place, and I didn't know exactly what the story was going to look like. I myself have never been addicted to opiates, but I have had a head injury, and when I had a head injury, I was prescribed opiates and took them. And it was I was very cautious with them because I knew how potentially dangerous they could be, and I had been educated about that. But it's also when you're dealing with something that's very painful, and that thing helps relieve that pain, it's a very tempting thing to abuse. And I think I sort of had the experience of realizing how easy it would be to become addicted to the medicine. So that was sort of where that storyline emerged from. The opiate stuff kind of came in at a side angle almost. It started being more about the place and the relationship between these two people, and then the opiate story kind of moved in and became a braided part of the bigger story. Yeah. Yeah, Oscar.
We have a couple questions from the Zoom chat. So
cool.
When I give you the question, if you wouldn't mind reading it or repeating it. So
yeah.
They can hear. So is the book fictional or based on personal experience? Is this your first book?
Yes, so two questions. Is the book fictional, and is it my first book? Yes, to both those questions. It is fiction, it's a novel, and it is my first book. There are aspects of my life that are, represented in the book in certain ways, but it's not nonfiction, it's not a memoir. The character Alejandro is not a, one-to-one representation of my boat building teacher that I worked with, although there are elements of his personality in that character. It's all, my teacher actually, when he read it, told me that he felt a little bit like he was reading, reading an alternate reality of his life, sort of, where there were elements of it, but then it would just kind of veer off into something that wasn't part of his life at all. So
there's another question. Did you ever know or experience an opioid addiction? Did you ever know? I know the question was asking.
Yeah, yeah, the question is, did I ever experience an opioid addiction myself? And no, that was one of the parts of the book that I had to research most heavily. Obviously, I was doing I had taken boat building classes, and so that there are sort of two fields of knowledge that factor heavily in the book, I would say. One is the has to do with addiction and opioids, and the other has to do with boat building. And the boat building stuff I was already taking, I had already taken these classes, so I knew a lot about it. I was sort of immersed in it. But the opioid stuff I didn't know that much about, and so I had to learn, what would it be like for Berg to go through withdrawal? What would it feel like? That passage I just read, like what kinds of medicine would he be given during that process? That sort of thing I had to learn about.
Did you know anybody personally? That was another question.
Yeah, the question, did I know anyone personally who has had an addiction? I did. Yeah, I do know some people who have been addicted to to opioids.
Did you interview anybody who had addiction?
Yeah, I interviewed people for a lot of different parts of the book. I interviewed people. I also read a lot. The one book that was really important was Sam Quinones's Dreamland, which is a sort of big overview of the crisis. And I read a lot of just sort of personal testimony from people, there's a lot of forums, people talking about what they're experiencing, what they're going through, and it's, many times very sort of heartrending to read, but also very instructive, because people are describing everything that's going on in their experience because they're trying to get answers and they want as good of an answer as they could possibly receive. So they're very specific about what's happening to them. And so for someone like me who is a writer, that was really valuable material to consider, to give me a close look at what that experience would be like.
Did talking to those people and getting that kind of information help any of them beat their addiction? Kind of just laying it out there.
I didn't talk to anyone who was in the experience of addiction at that moment. Yeah. But I think that can definitely help.
Yeah. Insight that the experience to someone who's never, and hear themselves say it. Sometimes I wonder if that's like a reality check or something.
Yeah, exactly. Almost like a talk therapy scenario. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In doing your research for the book, was there anything that you came across or that you learned or discovered that was just completely you were unaware of prior to starting?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. I mean, pretty much the whole experience was something that I wasn't very familiar with. So sort of anything that's in the book that really is any kind of like concrete details, probably something that I learned in the process of researching the book.
So then what made you want to write about opiate addiction if you didn't have like any prior experience, you didn't really know a whole lot of people, struggling with that, particular struggle? What made you kind of want to write about that?
It was my experience of having the concussion and then sort of seeing how easy it would be for that to happen to me. So in part, it was like a cautionary tale to myself that I was sort of spinning out. I think the other part of it was that I really wanted to talk about the experience of chronic pain, what it's like to suffer from something that is a daily pain. And I think from a fictional or dramatic perspective, opioids were a useful way of physicalizing that, because it's hard a lot of times, like if you have a type of pain that's not like a visible cut or something like that, it can be hard to communicate that to other people in real life that you're experiencing pain, and it's certainly hard to communicate in writing or in story. And so opioids were kind of like a useful narrative tool in some sense to talk about that, because they are a physical thing and they can be a way of sort of symbolizing or bringing the reader into the issue at hand, which I think is true of alcohol and drugs too in many ways. But in my particular case, I was interested in writing about opioids because I had this specific experience, and because it seems it is the most common experience that people who are, or it is the most common addiction that people dealing with chronic pain have in our time. And so it felt important to explore it and talk about it and sort of shine a light on what it looked like to the extent that I could. Yeah.
I really liked your choice of words. You said like he would say like maybe one last time before like stopping.
Yeah.
And then you use the word perk 30 instead of oxy 30 because there's no such thing as perk 30.
Oh,
So I thought it was no, but that's like right what everyone calls it. You know what I mean? So I really like that kind of like the small details that make it such a true story.
yeah. Yeah, most of that was like gleaned from the stuff that I talked
Right.
about, people's interviews and their writings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was a question from the chat. Were there any therapeutic benefits to working with both of them?
Yeah, that's I think a big part of the book. Oh, sorry, I'll repeat the question. Were there any therapeutic benefits to boat building? And I think, boat building is something that it really brings you into your body, into your own awareness, because it's the type of thing where you have to pay attention to what you're doing or you mess up. And there is a very sort of like physical reality to the way you use your hands. One of the first things Berg learns to do in the book is to sharpen a chisel. And it's the type of thing where if you move your hand a little bit, then you kind of dull the chisel. And so it trains you to sort of just focus on what's happening in front of you. And I think a lot of times we sort of mistreat our body because we are not paying attention to it, or we misdiagnose what's happening to us, or we don't listen to. A lot of times we have sort of, our body knows what it needs and has kind of an internal wisdom about what will make it better and what will make it healthy. And we often ignore that and are diverted from it by the fact that we're not paying attention to it. And so I think craft is really important because it sort of harnesses your focus and brings you into your own physical body in a way that can then be useful in terms of, yeah, exactly. Very similar to, meditation and boat building have a lot in common in the sense that they're both sort of tools for focusing attention.
This is my question. So
yeah.
How do you relate to the process of writing and boat building?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think writing is a lot more free form of a creative act. So boat building is a creative act in the sense that there's a lot of decisions you can make about how you build a boat. You can, from the type of sort of some of the things that were mentioned in that passage, like the type of wood, the design of the boat, the shape, its sail plan. There's lots of sort of creative decisions you can make, but there are also very real physical realities that have to be accounted for. Like it has to float and it has to move forward. And so there's some stuff that's kind of non-negotiable that gives you a container for your creativity, whereas in novel writing or writing in general, there's not really that container. And so on the one hand, that's nice because it gives you more freedom and you are, truly liberated to go in whatever direction you want. On the other hand, that can be sort of paralyzing because there's so many choices that it's hard to know what is essential and what's important to put in a book. Whereas with a boat, there are some things that you can say, this is vital, it has to do this. And so it gives you sort of a more simplified set of equations. Whereas with novel writing, you kind of, to a certain extent, you have to figure that out yourself or create some structure for yourself to work within. Yeah.
Did you ever build a boat?
I did, yeah. I took
All the way to the end?
I took.
Boats and go forward?
Yes, yeah. I've worked on a few different boats. Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question from the chat window.
Yeah.
What would you say is the main point you'd like to take people take away from the book?
I don't know if there's a main point. The question is, what is the main point that I would like people to take away from the book? I don't know if there's a main point to it. There's a lot of different aspects of it.
So yeah, in my experience, originally I did for the first 3 chapters this morning, went so fast, but I get the sense it was the process, and the process of building, the growth, process of addiction. So it isn't only one thing, but the experience, so to say, in what I saw. So
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I think probably the biggest lesson that Berg learns is that he is living his own life, and that no one's going to show him how to do it. I would say that's probably the biggest part of the. If I had to say what the biggest lesson that he learns is to sort of figure out how that he needs to have some amount of self-determination in his life, and he learns that through the practice of the craft. But at the beginning, he's sort of looking to Alejandro, looking to other people in his life to show him how to do it, how to do things, because he feels like he can't. And then at a certain point, that kind of turns, and he realizes that he is doing the thing that he's doing and that he can do it. And so that's sort of one of the broader takeaways, I would say.
Did Alejandro know he was battling depression when he picked up the trade?
He doesn't. No, not at the beginning. Yeah, he learns later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, there was another question.
Yeah.
I know it's your first book, so it's your only book so far.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions if you have any other works that
no, just the question is, do I have any other books? It's just this one. Yeah. Although you can go, I work on a magazine called The Believer Magazine. I work on that as an editor. That's a nonfiction magazine.
What's
So
your website?
It's believermag.com. If you want to check that out. It's a cool magazine based in Las Vegas now, where I live.
Any other questions for Daniel? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
I'm really honored that it helps me not have to talk all the time. You guys are sitting there for talking, sure. But it's been a great pleasure. You mentioned that there was an upcoming event in April. You want to?
Yeah. So we have the Believer, which I just mentioned. We have a festival in Las Vegas in April every year. There's a lot of artists, writers, comedians, filmmakers who come out for it. Last year we had Barry Jenkins, who is the director of Moonlight, and people do onstage interviews. There's comedy. There's performances. Last year we had Amy Mann. I don't know if you guys know that musician. But there's another one this year, and it's going to be really cool. So if you guys are interested, everything is free and open to the public. All you have to do is just come out for it. And if you look on our website, you'll eventually see information about it. And if you sign up for our newsletter, that's probably the best way to get information about it. That way, like right when the headliners are announced, you'll know about it and all that stuff. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break at 6:14 right now. We'll come back at 6:20. I'd like to just have a few minutes to chat with Daniel, and then I will finish up with my own lecture. That probably should be 30, 40 minutes. So we'll take 5 minutes. Yeah. So you're welcome to hang out, or if you like to walk out and drink your water. So I got you going. Oh, cool. I was like, this is fine. Yeah, I will interrupt you. Okay. Yes. What's the name of the book? I don't know. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Drive safe.
Thank you. Yeah, fine, no doubt. Alrighty, just one more minute and then we'll get started again. So, oh, I can see that the camera got off again. Is that better? I think everyone's back. I think Kim was outside smoking. So we'll wait for her to come back. Hopefully she comes back. Hopefully everyone comes back because I haven't given you the passcode yet, which is what you need to put into your assignment to prove that you were here. I'm not taking roll. That never works. I lose it. I can't read your handwriting. All kinds of bad things that happen. So I've learned. So we're going to have somebody said they on the chat, I think this would be a great film. I think so too. It's a really great book. Okay, we can get started. So I do have my own lecture. We'll see how far we get. One of the things I want to say is the reason I brought Daniel in, aside from the fact that Nevada Humanities paid to bring him down here, which was a really nice treat for us because we don't have a lot of funding for this kind of thing. And often bringing folks out, we need funding to pay for their travel and to offer them an honorarium. So he was really gracious. He just did it for the travel costs, and he was glad to do it. And you could tell he was enthusiastic about it. So I really appreciate that. But I wanted to talk about the intersection between art and using that as an intervention in addictions treatment. But before I get into that, I did want to bring up the fact that a lot of questions also from the chat window, and no problem, I'm looking at a lot of the questions were really, addiction's very personal. And a lot of you guys are here, I know personally, because I read your discussion posts or your research articles, or I talk to you individually, and you've told me your stories. And so it wasn't lost on me or Daniel that that he's telling a story from a perspective of somebody who isn't or hasn't suffered an addiction. But I think it's, while it still inspired him to produce a piece of art, that it's pretty real from my point of view, because he took it from other people's experiences. But at the same time, I think he was very respectful in the way he talked about addiction. And one of the things I get when I work in groups, and you'll get this when you work in groups, is the first thing they ask you is, are you in recovery? And my answer is always no, because I haven't been in recovery. But that doesn't mean I don't have something to offer to help them. And we have, you know, hundreds of years of research and science. But sometimes that personal thing can feel like, well, you don't really know. And you don't. But, you know, you don't really know what it's like to be me either. And I've been through my own pain and loss and heartache. And that's what I tell people. And they shut up. There's also a lot of defensiveness and shame that they feel. So they're like, well, I'm not going to open up to somebody who doesn't really know what it's like to be on the other side and expect me to tell my story to you while you judge me. That's the main issue. And I realized it early on. At first, I was fresh out of grad school. I was like, no, I don't know, you know. But then I started to learn, and I started to listen. And I learned about their experience. And I've worked in addiction treatment for over 10 years now. And while maybe I have not suffered from addiction myself, I have family members that have and that have died from it. I've also worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of folks who are in addiction. And I've learned a lot. So I'm qualified. But starting out, they might not feel that way. I want to caution you. You might say, well, I have my own addiction experience. You know, I was an addict, or my family members were, or I grew up in a household. And that might help you. And that might not. Because helping somebody overcome addiction isn't the same thing as having gone through it, right? Now, you might have picked up some skills on the way that you know, like, I know where you're at, I can see it, and your gut might be right. Or you might be projecting your own experience onto them. So it can help you if you're aware, and if you're using your experience to help a client, or if you're using it because you're maybe angry at the person that you used to be and you're going to lash out at them, which I've seen in group. You guys probably, if anybody's ever seen it, I'm like, wow, that was personal. And that wasn't necessarily what I call here and now. That's time travel. You know, they were talking to themselves so many years ago. And there's unresolved things for all of us that come up. And sometimes these experiences influence our practice. So hopefully stick to the training. Of course, bring yourself into the room. We don't want cardboard cutouts as therapists. We want real people there that are engaged, active, compassionate, empathic. So we need that too. But I wouldn't say it's enough just to have gone through the experience. That used to be the old model. That's how they used to be. If you had gone through a program and you stayed clean, you became a counselor. That's just not enough anymore. So we give years of experience, training, education, continued education, exams, licensure processes that are arduous. But you know what happens? The people who really want to do this and who are really passionate and committed will stay in it. It's like a marriage, you know? And those who aren't will drop out, and that's fine. We don't want them anyway. Because a lot of people get into, you know, you see it all the time. People get into professions to do good, and some of people to do bad. We've got doctors. I mean, you go to med school so you can, you know, I don't know, get dates. It's crazy to me. It's like, you know, there's like apps for that. You don't have to go through 7 years of college to, you know, and get a medical degree to pick people up. So I did want to mention that because it wasn't lost on me. And I know it's sensitive, and I could see people's emotions getting riled up and, you know, wondering really, what's this guy about? Why is he doing this? And I think he did the best explaining that. I think if nothing else, I like the idea that while it's a piece of art, and media and movies and TV can provide a positive understanding and experience of addiction for people, especially if it's done truthfully. You know, in this way, he really explores the struggle. One of the things I noticed in general with our society is there's a lack of an appreciation and introduction of some of the arts, and that can be poetry, writing, literature. My own personal fetish is mythology. If you talk to me for 5 minutes, you'll know that. I noticed it when I was working in the addictions field that some of these folks I couldn't reach. We couldn't reach through talk. We could talk and talk and talk, and things weren't changing. And so I went back to the things that that I felt that historically we used to help people come together as a society to heal as a people, and those are the arts. And then I'm going to use a few examples of how you might use that with clients. This is one thing that I would do in group. It may not be your thing, but I think you can tap into the kind of art that you're interested in to help introduce these things. Because really, art, when it's done correctly, not to create a feeling of desire, like, oh, I really, like you see a refrigerator and there's a nice, beautiful young lady showing it to you, and you think, that, you know, like this commercial art, you know, I'd love to have a refrigerator like that, you know. And then, or you see people in their offices, they have pictures of wine bottles and vineyards, and oh, wine, or ski slopes and mountains and things like that. And this is commercial art. This creates a desire. And then there's another art that that James Joyce terms pornographic art. This is something that makes you repulsive. You see something and you're disgusted by it. So these are two ways of using art, but not in the service of art. And art has the potential to transfix you. You see it and you don't feel anything. What Joyce calls static irony. You're stuck, you're transfixed. You see it and you don't think anything, you don't feel, it's like falling in love. You get slapped in the face, you're just, wow, what happened to me? And I'm different now. So this is that potential that art can do to transform the human psyche and spirit. And this is why I use it, because what we're working with here are people's minds and their hearts and their souls. And this is how you get people to change, because that drug has a hold of it in a very profound way. And for all intents and purposes, they're lost and they're a zombie. And that's what the zombie apocalypse is all about. We're slowly, one by one, turning into a zombie, right? It's bitten by one person and the next and the next. So people watch that show, which I can't stand. I've seen one episode and I'm like, this isn't what I do in treatment. I don't want to watch this at home. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, right? People going from being human beings to turned into animals. And then we're trying to turn them back. And the only way to do that is awaken the spirit. And the thing that we used for ages to do that is art. Before I just start talking for 45 minutes solid, I want to ask if anybody has any questions about what I'm discussing here, or if they have any ideas that they'd like to express about it, and maybe ways that you have used it or seen it used, or how art has affected you in your own personal life.
I want to read vision boards.
Explain that to me.
So for each group or each individual, they would get magazines, or they could draw, or any kind of whatever you wanted to put on like a 16 by 16 inch paper. And then they were supposed to go and hang it up and look at it. And it's supposed to foster inspiration. Well, and they did it alone. They didn't do it in groups. While kind of digging into yourself and really thinking, like, what do I want? And then creating this beautiful thing that's supposed to represent your future.
Okay, so engaging your imagination, creativity, and then developing kind of a goal for yourself that you can visualize, right? I see. There's a comment from the chat on Zoom. Literary art serves an escape as well as a window into another world. Yeah, so, but this isn't an escape that isn't detrimental. Like drugs and alcohol can be escape. Some people, I've seen them, like those romance, they'll use it to escape and not really deal with things, like just as pathological as drugs. But you can learn things from it, right? And in the best sense, art teaches us how to live, and especially drama. Does anyone see something besides the book? There's a lot of things coming in, so I'm going to try to read them as fast as I can. My whole family has produced artwork. I have produced pastel chalk paintings that help me to express my frustrations. Okay? I have danced for 16 years, and it has helped me overcome and deal with a lot of my own emotions. It has allowed me to open and free my mind, similar to an escape, as someone mentioned. I see the book, and the corner, I see Oscar Sita. Okay. That was the question earlier, right? Have you ever found time where art was not effective when working with an individual? No, no. Especially the visual arts and dance. If you take a child, one of the things that I see a lot of people who are in the grips of addiction is they've lost hope. They've lost that playfulness. So I love to see play in interventions, because getting to remember that you're a child. You're always going to be a child inside, and those things are what makes us flexible and have fun in mundane situations. Children can have fun anywhere. You can lock them in a room and they'll tear it up. But when you see children experience art, what's the first thing they do? What do kids do? If a kid saw me up here talking, they'd go home, or one of them might, and they'd start imitating, right? Children do that, and they do it, and they do it, and they do it, and they do it. And you'll see it with Disney films. They'll see, in Disney films always have a mythological theme embedded in them, and they'll watch it over and over and over and over, and they're getting it, and it's turning their spirit on. And this becomes their own life myth sometimes. If they're watching the right one, I don't know. I don't know what the dog one's supposed to, the Dalmatians one's supposed to teach you, but yeah, Kim.
So would you consider somebody who, say somebody had trauma so
Profound.
so that, yeah, so profound that it affected their speech, and the only way they could cope in public was to have earphones in with music. Would you consider that, or would you consider that more of a coping skill rather than a therapy?
I mean, it probably does both at different levels. It sounds like soothing behavior to me, but I would definitely want to move them on from that so they can have a kind of a richer experience with other people. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Another comment from the chat is art can help people identify their feelings and thoughts. Yeah, you ever notice like sometimes a song will come and you're like, I gotta listen to the song. I listen again and again, and then, because you're processing that same emotion and somehow they struck a chord with you. And we repeat things until people hear us. And sometimes that's acting out, right? If we're in pain. There's a lot of, I think being on the chat makes people more bold, which is good. Is art ever something you assign people to try outside of the office, or just something you work with them? Yeah, I do mandalas, which are kind of like this free form of expression of art. And when you get done with it, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, that's all inside me. It just, yeah, you can do a pen, a crayon, charcoal, whatever. You start with a circle and you just, no, not on their bodies. Oh, no, mandala, not the henna, you're thinking. Yeah. Some people, I'll say, people who if people have an interest in certain things, like, oh, I like arts and crafts, I like clay, I like to work with things, then I'll tell me, draw your pain for me, or describe it to me. What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? People are like, oh, it's black, like sludge. It stinks. It makes you, want to throw up if you smell it. They get really creative, really descriptive, because they know it inside and out. And sometimes I'll ask them, draw that for me, or some art therapists will use Play-Doh, which is very common. Therapists will keep in their office. Also, play therapy or sand tray. Those are interventions that that are use art as the main medium for processing. Poetry, writing, journaling, that's art. I mean, it's not art. It's an expression, and it helps, and it can turn into art. But these artistic mediums can provide, I'm real critical about writing, so I had to scrutinize Daniel for I brought him in. Another comment from the chat is, I've used drawing and coloring as a way to avoid certain thoughts, and especially anxiety. There have been times where I'll be coloring, 2 hours have gone by and I didn't know it. I've noticed my use of certain colors depending on what causes my anxiety and the levels of it. I use bolder colors if I'm really upset and more subtle ones if I'm slightly calm. Nice. Then somebody wrote Zentangle. I don't know what that means. What do you do when someone doesn't respond to art therapy or feel that they aren't creative enough? Well, of course, if an intervention is not working with them, we meet the client where they're at and we try another approach. We might try to encourage them. I might do it with them. Like, let's just do this. Especially my teenagers, like when I do the mandalas, everyone get a blank sheet of paper with a circle on it, and I do mine and I talk about myself. I was really open, and they talk about themselves, so they kind of see how to use it. But there may be some people who are like, I don't like this. This is not doing it for me. I didn't come to art therapy class. I'm here to talk about my problems with a professional. Okay, so guys, kind of get that way. But I've never had anybody tell me no. 10 years of practice, and nobody said, no, I'm not going to do that. But I have had times where I think this is not going in the direction I think that is going to yield any real tangible benefit. So I might change my approach. So you don't have to use it. I'm just saying it's one of the tools in our toolbox, right? The other a similar question is what if they're not open to it? I don't want to force anybody to go down this road. So I might start, and if I feel like this is not their cup of tea, that's fine. I use poetry, books. I assign books, which we call bibliotherapy. Most of them are usually fiction, but the beauty of a writer is they can really capture human experience in a very profound way. They pay attention to things, they're very sensitive. It's one of the reasons they're always such tortured people, because it's too much noise for them all the time. And one of the ways they work is to focus their energy and put it into something. So Zentangles are like mandalas. That's the. This is weird. Like trying to do. I've got like all this stuff going. And then the last question here: do you ever start with art, or do you wait for later sessions? Oh yeah, I typically won't start. I'm gonna spend the first 3 or 4 sessions just getting to know the person. 2 or 3 depends upon how open they are. The 5th or 6th session, that's always the sweet spot. That's where you really start getting into things. Some people are really ready, and 2 or 3 sessions they'll be good to go. Some people it takes a lot longer. It just depends where people are at, and their own process. And it's a form of growth and change, and you can't rush it. Some people grow faster than others. Some people grow slower. So I wouldn't. You really have to pick up on where the client's at and go at their pace, because otherwise you're going to lose them, or they're going to lose interest in coming. Any other questions? There's a lot. I think we got about half hour left. I want to leave some time for questions.
You can get certified in art therapy, right?
Mm-hmm. They have online programs. Anything that that you're interested in, I definitely would go into that, because it's going to keep you more interested in the work. Does that make sense? That your own personal passions are going to enliven your practice. That's why I use it, because it's something I'm interested in. And it doesn't have to be really esoteric or antiquated. I use a lot of antiquated stuff, but I've used Disney parables. Like I put Pinocchio. Anybody ever the story of Pinocchio? When he goes to Pleasure Island and him and all his friends are turned into jackasses, right? That's a perfect parable for addiction, right? It's something for nothing. It's all, we're gonna have fun, and guess what? You turn into this is what happens. And I show that, and I remember when I was working in a residential treatment program, and people were like, "Whoa!" There's a poem by Shel Silverstein that it's a 6-minute YouTube video that somebody animated. It's beautiful. It's called "The Missing Piece Meets the Big O," and we watched that in group. And so it's not, it doesn't have to be kinetic art where you're drawing and painting, things like that. It can be just experiencing it and sharing into this experience. And we tend to, of course, project ourselves, just like if you've ever read, like, what's that vampire book? The girl, what? Twilight, yeah. The girl is so nondescript. She's just a blank shell that anybody can project themselves onto. While the vampire is in detail. His teeth, how shiny they are, and how he sparkles, all these things, I never read it, but I read a synopsis of it. I couldn't watch the first 30 minutes of the first one. After he pushed the, I was like, I can't. I could be learning Chinese or something. Somebody's asking about some books that they could use and some titles. That's a hard one. I will email a list when I get back to my office, so I'll try to send that out. One book I use very often that isn't, it's more kind of instructional, is the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. Another question is, what percentage do you think art and meditation works on recovery during therapy? What percentage do you think art/meditation works on recovery during therapy? Works on the questions. So 100%. Okay. I mean, recovery it's a meditation, and the mantra is stop using drugs, right? Stop using drugs. Stop using drugs. Hey, good morning. Stop using drugs. Hi, how are you? Good. I'm going to stop using drugs. You know, what's going on today? I'm doing good. I'm going to stop using drugs. That's the mantra. And then all of a sudden, because you know what? The other one is keep using drugs. Keep using drugs. Keep using drugs. So how it works itself out. Of course, I'm simplifying that, but that's the message. You don't need to do drugs because it's a safe place. You can have fun with art and do vision boards and have a future and have a life and have friends, and you can enjoy a sunset and a sunrise, or, you know, hanging out at a park and playing guitar. I don't know. The point is helping them find a way, because drugs is a cheap substitute for life. And life is pretty great if you can experience it. But if you're numbed out and checked out, then you're not going to have those experiences. So we reintroduce them to what it is to be a human being, living fulfilled and enjoying life. Because they lose so much. And that's when they say, you know what, it doesn't matter anymore. I keep using this, but I don't even feel good anymore. Because it gets to that point. There are a lot of questions coming in here. We might not have time for my stuff, but that's okay. In your group therapy, what is the percentage of those who use art therapy? Well, if you're in my group therapy, then you're going to use it every time I use its intervention. I might assign somebody in individual counseling to work on it. I would say that every treatment program I've seen has some kind of creative, artistic expression. That's not just with substance abuse, any kind of mental health counseling, therapy. In the hospitals, we had art therapy and things like that. Have you ever used self-help books in therapy? Yeah, in our problem gambling, we had an intensive outpatient program that was 6 weeks long, and we had a self-help workbook. Have you ever written any books, blogs, articles, or done any peer review articles? Yes, I have. I wrote a couple book reviews. I have 2 peer-reviewed articles in the last couple years, and I've also contributed to a chapter in a book. I can't remember, dealing with substance abuse and pregnant women. I don't know why they're asking that. You can Google me. Okay, so any other questions before I get on a little bit? So what I'm going to do right now is show you how I might use an intervention, but I'm going to use it directed towards the students. So this isn't for people who are recovering from addiction. Of course, they might find some value in it, but this is to talk about you, your own life journey, your own experience, and how it might inspire you. Okay? Bear with me. I'm going to try to get the correct. Where's the remote?
Is that it?
I'm going to have to do it twice, so. Let's go back one slide, and let's talk a little bit about the symbol that I've used is our stamp for human services. And if any of you, I'm sure a few of you have been around long enough, especially my bachelor's folks, to get a little bit of information on why I use this. Somebody asking for the passcode. I'll give you the passcode at the end of the talk, so you can't leave early. I can't see who's writing this stuff. It just says, oh, it's Tina. Tina wants to pass it. Tina, you'll get it it's at the end. So now I work in health science, human services, so we have a lot of nursing folks, and we deal with doctors and a lot of medical folks. And they say, well, isn't that medical? And it's not. It's actually the medical is actually a single serpent going up the staff, and that's called the staff of Eusebius. This is the caduceus of Hermes, and it's a short staff that Hermes, who's the messenger of the gods, holds in his right hand. And the description of Hermes was he's the messenger of the gods who is the guide of the dead and protector of merchants, shepherds, gamblers, liars, and thieves. But that's not really true. He comes and travels between two worlds. So he's from the spirit world and also this material human world. And he is the guide of souls. Sometimes he takes them to dead, and sometimes he takes them to where they need to go. And as helpers, we are soul guides in some ways. We find something that enlivens people, excites them, makes them reflect on their own life and their own values, and we explore that to help turn them on, so to say, because they're in the off position. I like to say a lot of times when people are in the midst of the depression or substance abuse, they're just not living a real life. They're almost dead. They're almost like I said, zombies earlier. So this is one reason I chose the caduceus of Hermes as our symbol as helpers in the human services field. The next two, I'm going to have to tell you a couple stories before I reveal what that's all about. And I'm going to start off by talking about how difficult the work is that we do and how life happens. And I hear it. I mean, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from students. People have passed. People are very sick, car accidents, deaths. Life keeps going on. And I'm expecting you to come and bring 100% every week, even when I'm out of town and I'm only giving like 85%. And to put that aside or deal with it, so to say, and keep showing up. And I know that's not easy. And I'm sure a lot of people feel frustrated and want to quit. But the thing is, it doesn't mean that those problems are going to go away. And in the state of Nevada, we're 49th in the country of providers for substance abuse counseling. And if we don't do something quickly and start, because it takes time to grow you guys. It's not like you just, crank a box and we got new substance abuse counselors. You got to go through a 4-year program now, and then you got to get licensed as an intern, and that takes 2-3 years, sometimes 4 years, depending upon your level of education. If you go through my program, you'll be done in 2 years to be fully licensed, and you can practice without a supervisor. But that doesn't mean to say that you don't recognize how difficult this work is. And sometimes you might think, what's the point? Why do all this? This is dealing with people's problems is horrible. I've got my own problems. And Oscar's adding more problems to my life. That's what it feels like, right? Because I'm challenging you, and we're doing it in the hopes that you'll grow into a professional that, one, can tolerate stress. That's part of my process. 2, that can rely on your education and training when you get stuck. And 3, my own experience that I'm inserting into all the lessons, and of course, Professor Andaya as well, because she's a licensed professional. And I wouldn't hire a staff member that wasn't a licensed professional. You're never going to see that in this program as long as I'm running it. And you might go to a lot of different colleges, universities, and they'll have people who are really great researchers, but they haven't sat in a chair. That's what I call it, being a therapist, and what it really means to be that. So I want to give you a couple lessons onto how you can tolerate the terrible nature of life, and also in spite of the fact that certain things will never change, death, destruction, mayhem, loss, grief will always exist. But to see it and accept it and experience it, not by running away from it and hiding from it and saying, you know what, screw this, I'm going to go get an MBA and get rich, and these people can go screw themselves, you know. But to look at it and say yay to all of it. Because if you can do that in your own life, it's going to be a great ride. In life, you'll ride on a sublime wave. But if you keep falling down and thinking, you're going to give up, you're going to lose faith. And there's two mythological stories that I'd like to use. One is, they're very different, but if you can combine them, so to say, is the way you have to combine these two snakes. Because one, they're actually polar opposites, these snakes, and I'll get into that in a minute if we have enough time. I'm really having a hard time focusing around. It's a little late. I've been up since, I was reading Daniel's book at like 4:30 this morning. Yeah, right. No, I got up early, see? They're very different in a sense, but they're related, just like the poles of the earth are related in a way, you know. And hopefully you'll see that theme and we can talk about it. The first is the story of Job from the Old Testament. And did I tell you this story? No.
I know Job.
She knows Job. So what is Job's story?
Everything just starts just crashing around. Everything goes bad, basically.
Yeah.
But somehow he has to still, have faith in his God. That he can pull through it. Yeah, he loses everything and everyone. Everything. And
Yeah.
his faith is no
Satan because of his faith. Satan did him because of his faith.
Right. So Satan, he goes to God and he says, Job is a faithful man, but he's only faithful because you've been good to him. Look he has a tremendous flock and a large, healthy family, and he has a wonderful home and farm and all these things. He's an esteemed member of his community. But if you took those things away from him, he would turn his faith against you. And so God makes a bet with Satan and says, you can do anything you want to him, but you can't kill him. And so he gives him a bad case of boils. A flood wipes out his flock, and I think the house burns down. The fam. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because she loses faith in the whole process. He even tries to encourage him, and so then he's left. And if you can see this image here, he's lying in a kind of in ashes. He's got nothing but a cloth laying over, and his friends are coming to him, his comforters, and they're saying, "You must have done something wrong to anger God." And he said, "I have not. I did not. I've always been faithful." And so the devil failed. And so because of this, God was forced to reveal himself to Job. And what did he say to Job? Did he say, "I'm sorry"? Did he say, "I tried to win a bet and I did the best I could"? No. He said, "Did you create Leviathan, the whale? Could you fill his head with harpoons? Could you catch him on a hook? I did." And so he's saying, I am great. And I do not have to adhere to the moral attitudes of man, because I am separate from man. I am unassailable. And so with that, Job fell to his knees. He looked down, and he's laying in a pile of ashes that was his house before, and maybe some family members. He said, "I have heard of you with my ears. I have now seen you with my eyes. I bow my head. I cover my head in ash, and I'm ashamed." And this is the whole smudging thing that some Catholics do. To say, this is my faith, and in spite of anything that's going to happen to me. And I tell you this story not because God's a bad guy, but while we have human values and we try to save and help people and nurture them and guide them, and the fact of the matter is a lot of your clients are going to die. And I want you to recognize this up front. So when you get out in the field, you don't go home one day like I did after my first couple of months practicing, and I was standing at Albertsons, and I looked at some tomatoes, and I started crying because I didn't know why, because I was pushing everything down because I was not prepared psychologically to deal with some of the stories I was hearing, some of the terrible experiences my clients have had. And I thought, Jesus, how does anybody live through all this? And then, of course, it popped. So it came out like a bad sore. But I thought, every time I see you guys and when I do the symposium, I think I want to give them something that I didn't get. I want to give them something that's really meaningful and important, and it isn't in the textbooks. And this isn't, really, honestly. I had to find it on my own. And so you accept that the universe can be cruel, and everything that comes in this world is going to go out of it. Everything that lives and dies. Death inheres in life. There is no life without death, no death without life. Think about what a horrible world it would be if there was no death. Think about all the cockroaches that were born. They'd still be alive. We'd be swimming in a sea of cockroaches. So death has to come, right? And then there's new space for new generation to come. And think about if there was death with no life, there wouldn't be nothing in existence. So those two things have to be in. And to understand and accept that first. That's the first precept. That this is the way it is, and you can't change it. And you want to. And if you were God, you'd do it different, but you know you'd probably make a mess of things. Right? We don't know why things are set the way they are. But it's produced a lot. There's 7 billion of us hanging around, so something's going right. And the second story is from the old Greek myths of Prometheus. And who knows the story of Prometheus and what his story was? So Zeus had created human beings to worship the gods, but they lived in darkness. They had no tools, they had no culture, they had no technology, they had no fire. And so Prometheus went and asked Zeus, why not give them light? Why not raise them up? And Zeus refused, and he said, this fire is a divine light, and it's not for them. So Prometheus stormed heaven, and he stole the fire. And sometimes he's referred to as the fire thief. And he gave it to man. And man enjoyed this fire, the warmth that it brought, the culture. And it's really the kind of inception of technology, if you think about it. And it created all these wonderful things that we have, and terrible things, too. Nothing comes in this world as one. There's always, it's polar opposite. Everything that comes in this world has its opposite, always. And so what happens to Prometheus as a result of defying Zeus, the king of the gods? He's pinned to a rock. And every day, an eagle comes down and tears his liver from his body. But he's immortal, so it grows back and it starts again over and over and over. And this cycle happens. And his friends come to him and say, just say you're sorry. Just ask Zeus for forgiveness, and he'll let you go. We've all set it up. And what does he say in response to this? What? I'm not sorry. And there's a line from a telling of this. I can't remember the author right now. But he says, I care less than nothing for Zeus. Let him do what he likes. And so in the face of Zeus, this unassailable God, because he's the counterpart to the Christian, Judeo-Christian God, he says, no, I'm with the humans. And I know it's going to be painful. And I'm willing to accept the pain and the struggle, because this is what I believe in. And this is the other side of this story that I want to say. In spite of the fact that we know these things are going to happen, we lean towards the human values because we're humans. And that's what creates our general humanity. And we could say, you know what, whoever doesn't get it and they're lost in the street, and let them go. Fine. Just let them be lost in this world. And there are people that have that attitude. They cut funding from our drug and alcohol programs. They change laws to make it hard to access services. They don't reimburse counselors for substance abuse counseling. There's all kinds. These people we're working against them. They're working against us. That's a weird thing to think. Like the courts sometimes, yeah, they don't get it. The criminal justice system a lot of times. So I wanted to introduce these two concepts to you. One, this immutable power that is unstoppable. Two, we've decided to challenge it. And while we lose, we win too, right? Because that's what we believe in. And it makes the world a better place. And we do change things, and people's lives are saved. But that doesn't change the fact that still bad things are going to happen. And some people are going to get lost in it. And I want to remind you that. So that when you go up against this work, you're not doing it because, oh, geez, everybody could just get better and I'd be the best therapist in the world and I'm going to save everybody. And you might do this in your first year, and then you realize you get knocked down a peg or two and go, this is a lot harder job than I thought. And it isn't about changing people. It's about helping people change themselves, right? It's about providing an environment for an opportunity for growth and change and healing and absolution. Because it's not what you think. You'll get a new attitude towards it. But if you don't adjust it, you're going to burn out. You're going to say, it's too hard. It's not possible. They're never doing what I say. I worked with this guy for 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, and then he relapsed. Part of it. But you're going after it the wrong way. You want to win. There's no winning to life. Nobody gets out alive, just so you know. Mortality is 100%. It always has been. But what you can do is enjoy the process and the experience and watching it in a detached way. Yes, you care and you're compassionate, but you can't be all in because it's not up to you. Then you're going to try to control things and the outcomes, and we can't do that. Just like our own lives. You start to realize, well, yeah, I got some things in control, but there's a lot of things happening that I have no control over. But you do the best you can, and you try to ride on that wave. Yeah, Kim, you had a question?
I was just going to say, when you were talking about, some are going to make it and right at first, we might feel like, hey, yeah, and I'm not going to date myself, but something I learned quite a few years ago when I was doing just a strictly substance. Actually, I do very little substance use now, and I'm actually glad about it. But one of the first things I learned with that internship way back when was that, and it kind of helped with keeping the whole internalization thing in perspective, is that we can't take credit for a client's success. That's that client's success. That's not our success. And if we do that, then the flip side of that is we also have to take responsibility for every single one that fails.
Right.
And that's a lot of weight on our shoulders. And that just really kind of left it in balance for me. I'm not
right. And what burns people out is that they're getting upset when your clients don't succeed. You're not doing it my way. I told you how to do it, and you're not doing it. I mean, I've seen this when you try to raise children. If you just kind of let them be, they with enough support, they kind of grow naturally up, right? But a lot of people try to mess with it, and it starts to create all kinds of funky side effects. Any questions about that? Anybody in Elko? Thank you guys for hanging out there. It's a little bit, since we're here all in person, I know sometimes you can feel a little bit left behind on the other side of the monitor. I'm going to check the chat Zoom, and it's a little bit cumbersome to do this on Zoom, but there are some folks that can't get here tonight, and I'm recording this, and so you can review this. And if you want to do a write-up instead of coming, and I know a lot of you guys are like, I'm not doing that write-up. Just give me the passcodes and get out of here. Somebody did mention that a book that I read and love is Healing the Wounded Soul by Katie Souza. Yeah, I got a lot of books, but thanks for sharing. Any questions going forward? I know that this is more of a lecture than... Somebody said, we need more people like you in West Virginia. That's from Shaughnessy. I think she's are you in West Virginia, Shaughnessy? Yes. So thank you. And this is how far our program's going. I had somebody from Dubai call me. I guess we can't do Dubai. I tried. I'm so excited. I don't have to do these things, but I enjoy seeing you guys, us getting together. We do it a couple times a semester. I want you to see your face, to know that I'm a real person. I'm not just a computer message. but also because this is a human business we're in, and I hope that you guys always feel supported by me as your instructor and as program coordinator and Professor Andaya. You know, I will only bring in the best, and this program is expanding. We went from when I started to the first year, 2 graduates to 1 to 6 last spring. We're on track to have at least 12 this year. And so I think this is a good way to find a balance between online education and in-person. I remember sitting in those lectures for 3 hours thinking, what am I doing here? What's going to be on the exam? Please stop talking. Yeah. So I appreciate your encouragement, and when you say there's going to be people like you need more people in West Virginia, that'll be you. Okay, once you're done with our program, you can help grow those folks. Okay, thanks. Okay, folks. So any other questions before I go on? Comments? You'd like to share something about yourself, program, anything? Fine. Okay. All right, everybody. I'm sure they're waiting with bated breath. So let's see where I can get to. I'm gonna cut this short because I have so many things I want to talk about. But let me explain here. So this is the staff of caduceus, and in most forms, in most arts, it looks like this. But in fact, it's this. There's these opposed. Oh. So it looks like this. It looks like that. There's these opposing. These serpents are opposites. One is life, one is death. In the center, that's where you have health, right? That's where life is. It's in the middle of life and death. We're all growing towards our own death, right? We're growing and dying at the same time, simultaneously. Won't have time to get to that one. The last part of explaining the symbol that we use here for human services. So I explained this part, the staff of caduceus. The second part are the wings of Pegasus, and that's another myth I can't get into, but I smushed all these together. And the last one is the fire of Prometheus that he stole from the heavens to give to man. And these things are all what we do as therapists. When people grow and change and heal, they gain freedom, liberty. They choose a life. You know, they can fly wherever they want in the world. So I'm saying their spirit's free. And the fire of Prometheus is the knowledge, the wisdom, the light that we shine on them to help them grow, just like a plant grows when you give it light. And to conclude, I had this whole one on Medusa I wanted to do, but I'll have to save for another time. I did want to talk a little bit about something that Daniel picked up on, was talking about trusting the body and its own wisdom to heal. And the body, the mind, the spirit have their own faculties to do that. I'm going to read this quote by D.H. Lawrence, and it's something I learned about working with people, is that you have to trust their process, that their own spirit has their own best interests at heart. Sometimes their mind doesn't, and their brain and their body doesn't, but their spirit does. How do you spell the staff name? Caduceus. C-A-D-U-C-E-U-S. Caduceus of Hermes. So the quote here by D.H. Lawrence, he was a naturalist and a kind of a scientist back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. My belief is that the body and the flesh as being wiser than the intellect. The body unconscious is where life bubbles up in us. It is how we know that we are alive to the depths of our souls and in touch with somewhere with the vivid reaches of the cosmos. So there's this reflection between body, spirit, the stars. We are the same. You know, you hear this whole stardust thing. Yeah, we are. And then the last myth that I'd like to talk about is, and I hopefully have enough time, is that of Eros and Psyche. Psyche, psychology, the mind, is this beautiful woman, and she is so beautiful, in fact, she draws the ire of Venus, the goddess of love. And she sends her son, Eros, or Cupid, and says, you go and ruin this woman because I can't have somebody besting me in beauty. And when she's looking at some beast, you strike her with your arrow, make her fall in love with it, and no man will want her after that. So he sneaks into her bedchamber, he veils himself, makes himself invisible, and he's hovering over her, and he's looking at her, and he's struck by her, how beautiful she is, and she senses that he's in the room. She opens her eyes, and when he sees her eyes, and she becomes aware, he's almost shocked, and he backs away, and as he's looking into her eyes, he scrapes his thigh with one of his own arrows, and he falls deeply in love with her. And he goes back to his mom. He says, "I'm not doing this," you know. And she kidnaps her. Hades takes her to the underworld. He comes back down and saves her, brings her back up, and then he finally says, "Enough! I'm not doing anything." And his job is to make things fall in love, and without that, nothing grows, and the world starts to die. Plants aren't growing, the flowers aren't, the bees aren't going, the people aren't going, and all the gods come together and say, "You've got to do something. The world's dying because he's refusing to help. You need to bless this union." And so she does. She comes around. She says, "Okay, you can be married, and I'll stop pestering you guys." And what is this myth trying to tell us? The psyche is lost without love. And love that we give our clients is compassion and empathy. And without, if you're taking my classes, you keep hearing it. I keep pounding it into you, like, I know, here we go. And you guys have to like repeat it. And because of empathy and compassion, I hear you guys doing it, thinking that. And what I'm telling you, this is going to get into you, and it's going to be part of your practice. And every time I'm with a client, that's what I'm doing. That's the first thing. But it centers the mind. It brings the mind out of chaos and madness into a direction. It's healing. And so a lot of times our clients are lacking this. They can't get it anywhere. They pissed everyone off. Nobody's going to give it to them. So they come to us, and how we used to do it before was they got met with judgment and ridicule and say, you need to get with the program. You haven't reached rock bottom yet. Go out and OD and then maybe you'll get it. No, that's not the way to do it. We can reach people a lot sooner, and we know it from the research and also from research practice that this works. And if you are open and you're compassionate and you're accepting and non-judgmental, people start to heal. And talking helps when it's under the context of this setting and this environment. You create this bubble of safety that they can be in and go, okay, I'm not bad. I did some bad things, but that doesn't mean I have to keep doing them, and I can change. And it's hard to change when people are judging you and look at you like you're not even human, which is how you feel sometimes when you're lost in addiction and you pissed everyone off because you've done terrible things. But to help them process that shame and tend to experience the guilt. And guilt is a great teacher, right? Because now you don't want to do it again. But what happens a lot of times is they feel shame. They're almost approaching guilt, and they're like, I'm going to numb out. And so they never learn the lesson. And they're like, yeah, this is great. And then all of a sudden, feel the shame. Ooh, here comes guilt. I need to get high again. And so that never clicks for you. You're also damaging nerves and memory cells that are affecting the ability to do that. That's why it takes like 3 months before people start getting like dried out, we say, because they can start to they're in this fog for a long time and they keep trying to escape their feelings. And we sit with them and say, tell me, what was it like? And once they process it with somebody, they're like, I don't ever want to do that again. And you know it, and you can hear it. It's like a movie where you hear the bells and the angel gets his wings. When I hear clients talk, I'm like, that's it. They got it. She got her wings. And this myth it's a personal favorite of mine. I got to see it cast in bronze when I was at the Louvre this summer, and I have this print because I can't afford real art. I just get prints from this artprints.com, and I put them in frames in my house. But it works, yeah. And I remember when I was studying this myth and how it came to me that this was what these ancient myths were trying to convey to us, that to save the beautiful mind, you have to give it love. And if you can remember that, even when you sometimes sitting across from somebody, you think, this person is despicable. And maybe they are, but so are you. And if you can suspend your judgment for a moment and say, and what comes through is your compassion. And then the healing process can start, but it cannot start without that. And that's why some people aren't made for this work. And you're going to find out whether you're made for it or not. If you can be compassionate, you know, when it's not easy. He's laughing at me.
My site supervisor.
Oh, okay.
So we have a lot of insight.
Oh, I see. With that, I'd like to finish up on one last thing. It's a lot of the work that that I reference and we talk about in the program is Bill Miller's work that comes from Carl Rogers' work about person-centered therapy and motivational interviewing. And a lot of that work directly is that they recognize that empathy is the key to client outcomes. The ability for a therapist to empathize accurately directly affects client outcomes up to 2 years. And so you'll think, oh, this is just, you know, fuzzy, warm feeling, you know, being nice to people when they should, you know, be mean to them. That's not how it works. It's been scientifically proven over and over and over. They've done replicated trials from his work, and it's now the standard for care. But that has not been, that I would say maybe the last 5 years that people are starting to get that, 10 years maybe. I went through my whole program, we barely talked about this stuff. You know, I graduated in 2008 with my master's program. So I thought, man, this is something they need, especially in the world of addictions treatment. So I hope you remember that if you don't know what else to do, if you do that, you'll be fine. That's 2/3 of the outcome. The other 1/3 we're fighting for is whatever intervention you decide to use. But if you approach them with genuineness, compassion, unconditional positive regard, it works. That's the key that fits the lock that you're trying to open. But if you can't do that, it's not easy to do, trust me. You almost have to create another way of being when you're with clients than who you are in real life, because we have our own values and our own identity. But if you can cultivate that and grow it, it gets easier and easier. And in the moment, you feel it and you feel good. It doesn't hurt you, trust me. So with that, are there any questions before we close shop? I'm going to give you the passcode. You ready? Are you guys listening on chat? So for those of you that have assignments in my class, and this is an assignment, in order to turn this assignment in, you have to go put this passcode in your assignment and submit it. That's it. It's boat builder, boat builder, boat builder, 3 times. Yeah, boat builder, boat builder, boat builder, which is the title of Dan Goombeiner's book. Boat builder, boat builder, boat builder. We do not have a relationship previously to this. I was contacted by Nevada Humanities to host him, and I was glad to do it. Tonight's the first time we met, but I think it was a really nice treat to have him out here, and I hope you guys appreciate that. And I hope to do things like this in the future. We have our next symposium at the end of the month. Sorry I had to squeeze it into 1 month, but between finals and midterms, and there's only times that I could get it out of there. So it's on the 30th. You can attend live at sites. Unfortunately, somebody texted me from Winnemucca. It was closed, and Bad Mountain was closed. I asked them to have people stand by. I'm really sorry that that happened. Hopefully they're watching. I sent them the link. I did the best that I could to make this a success, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll send out another reminder and a flyer because it'll have a different theme. But if there's no more questions, we can close up. Remember, the passcode again is boat builder, boat builder, boat builder 3 times. I'm watching from Winnemucca. Thank you for the link. Okay, so somebody got it. Thank you. Glad to hear it. If nothing else, let's close out. Thanks, and Elko. They're all waving. And please, there's water here and candy. Take some of that with you. Otherwise, I got to haul back out to my car. And you all have a good night. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Nice to see you.